Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the RADitude podcast. And as usual, I'm really excited about my guest, but this one is even more special. Not to diminish anyone else, but I've got Laurie Hubbs here, and she has been my relationship coach for about 8 years or so, something like that, a long time, through several relationships. And she probably knows me better than most people know me. So I don't know what's going to happen in this podcast, but we're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to understand Laurie's process and things like that. But I met her in the Tony Robbins world when she was coaching for them. She was Tony's #1 relationship coach. And I said, I got to have #1, whether it's true or not. I believe it is. And she has just been amazing. Literally every session I have with her, something happens. Some words of wisdom come from Laurie that just make me a better person. And I am so indebted to her in just my personal growth. I'm happy to welcome Laurie Hubbs to the RADitude podcast. Welcome, Laurie.
Thank you, Robert. Oh my goodness, such kind words. And I do have to say, it's just been a joy working with you. You are such a fun client.
Well, I have some good stories that seem to keep popping up, and it gives food for growth, I guess is the way I've come to learn it. And I'm still learning every single time we talk. So thank you so much. I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think food for growth is such a great way to put that, because I don't think any of us master relationships and get them right all the time. I just don't think it works that way. It's too complex, too many different facets, too many different variables. And in relationships, we all stumble from time to time. Even people that are really good at it have struggled with relationships.
I remember Tony saying that if you want to be on a spiritual journey, be in an intimate relationship. And it's so interesting to even just think about that concept. Why is that true, do you think?
Maybe it has to do with the creation of humankind and what God or the higher power or the universe or whatever you believe in has in mind for us. But if there is anything on this earth that makes us grow as individuals, it's being in an intimate relationship, trying to establish and then keep that intimate relationship functioning and intimate, and even better, keep it satisfying and flat out fun. And that's a continual growth experience.
So how did you get started, Laurie? Like, what did you want to be when you were a little girl, and how did you become this relationship expert?
Oh, gosh. Nobody's asked me that in a long time. So we'll tell you, in the beginning, I wanted to be a butterfly. And then to my dismay, I found out that wasn't possible. So I had to move on to more realistic goals. And you know how throughout life, you kind of try things on. In my early 30s, I had several experiences just right in a row where people in absolute crisis, relationship crises were coming to me saying, I need somebody to talk to. I need help. I have to figure this out. Then one day after the third person exited our house after a crying session, my husband came home from work with a folded newspaper. And in that newspaper, he'd circled in great big red ink an ad for a master's in counseling program. And he handed it to me and he said, Laurie, you need to do this. This is who you are. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm not sure. I don't know, equivocating like we do as human beings. And there's some smartness to that, really thinking through what you want. So I went around and I took that ad to several people that I know and said, what do you think? Not a single person said no. Everybody said, oh my gosh, yes, you should do this. Oh my gosh, you were meant to be a therapist. You were meant to help people. So I went to grad school and I became a therapist, and I did the relatively long and arduous process to become a therapist. There's grad school, 2 to 4 years, depending on how fast you do it. And then in the state I was in, there are 4,000 hours of clinical supervision, which takes 3 or 4 years. And then you earn your way into being able to take your licensing exam. So getting a counseling license is not a quick and easy process. People who do it have gone through a lot to earn that. They've mastered a big body of knowledge. And so that's how it started. And then I was working at a university. I was having a counseling practice, private practice, working primarily with marriages. And I came into the Tony world and discovered coaching. And I figured out, well, actually, I did this little experiment where in the morning I'd work with my clients from a therapy perspective. In the afternoon, I'd work from a coaching perspective. And I was really looking for a couple of things. Number one, under which perspective my clients made faster progress. And number two, which I enjoyed more. Because if I was enjoying the work, the clients were more likely to enjoy the work. And after a year of this, and I set out to do it for a full year, and I kept notes on this, found that my clients moved through relationship issues faster from a coaching perspective than they did from a counseling perspective. Now, don't get me wrong, counseling, it's important. We need therapists. There is a place in the world for therapists that can't be filled by anything other than a well-trained therapist. But there are also some things in life that really respond better to coaching. And in my experience, marriage work, intimate relationship work responds better to a coaching modality. And so that's what brought me to where I am today.
So what would the difference be between therapy or counseling and coaching?
Oh, good question. So therapy comes from a medical model, comes from the model of fixing things. Coaching comes from more of a strength model. Now, I will say over the years, therapy has moved to more of a strength-based model. So there are a lot of therapists out there that are doing therapy, coaching kind of mashup, and that's a pretty impressive way to work. Some of the differences are that if a couple were to walk into a therapy office and talk about a problem they're having, and they say, we fight all the time. All we do is fight. We fight all the time. It's such a problem. A therapist is likely to say, well, tell me what you're fighting about. There's nothing wrong with that, except that it puts the clients right back into that conflict. As a coach, when someone comes into my office and says, we fight all the time, we can't seem to get along, my response is, that is awesome. That's great that you fight all the time, because that tells me you're invested in this relationship. That tells me you both have energy around this. So let's take that energy and let's package it and use it in ways that work for you instead of against you. The difference is seeing the problem as the problem and the people as the solution.
Yeah. I've never really thought about that, but it just shows your brilliance again. So are you mostly doing coaching now, or do you still do therapy?
I do a lot of therapy referrals, but I don't do straight out therapy anymore. And really, I haven't for the last 15 years or so. Everything that I have dealt with in the last 15 years, I've really done from a coaching perspective.
And so what are some of the more interesting kind of situations that you have that are presented with you?
Good question. You know, my business really has two channels. I work with individuals, couples, and families around relationship issues. And then I work with businesses. Companies and corporations will hire me when they have groups of people who are not getting along or not performing because something within the group dynamic. And so in those two channels, I can see some very different things. There are also some real similarities. For example, when any two or more people are not getting along, it rarely has to do with the issue that people say is the issue. It almost always has to do with what people are doing in between our ears, because we live and die by what we do up here. That's where our success lies. That's where our happiness lies. That's where our fulfillment lies. It all lies in between our ears. And so in relationships, my relationship, your relationship, anyone's relationship is way more about what's happening from our own side of it. So if I'm not getting along with someone, it's way less about that person and way more about me, my interpretations, what I'm thinking, what I'm attributing to their actions or their beliefs, all of those. So if I have a problem with my partner, the place I start is me, not them.
So what are some interesting things that come up that someone is blaming their partner so much on, yet is on them?
Oh, everything.
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 Certainly I haven't brought anything like that to you.
No, of course not. So, unhappiness is one of them. Just, I'm not happy in this relationship because my partner does this or doesn't do that or won't do this or won't try that. So my happiness, I'm making my partner's responsibility. And the reality is, if I'm unhappy, that's because of me, not because of my partner. I will tell you the interesting thing about that is that when we get to the point that we see that our individual happiness is ours, doesn't belong to anybody else, nobody else really influences it. It gets generated and it gets fed by us and what we're doing inside our heads. Once we get that, we grow up and we start standing in a very self-responsible place. It's that self-responsibility piece that most people don't really like.
One of the things that I've been contemplating lately is just this concept of triggers. I didn't know what they were, but this is like new terminology to me, that people trigger each other all the time. And it's easy to say, well, that person's not the right person because they do this and this and this, just like you said, they're triggering me. But then to look at yourself and go like, how do I handle those triggers? What do you tell a person that is being triggered by someone that it's you, and how do you work with that kind of person?
Yeah, and that's so common. It's so common because I don't know if it's a cultural thing or if it's just a human nature thing to make someone else responsible for our unhappiness or someone else responsible for our anger. But it's such a human first reaction. And so one of the ways I work with this is to talk to people about, first, bare bones fact. By the time you are an adult living on this earth, you've been traumatized. All of us have had some trauma along the way, some more than others, some harder than others, some deeper than others, but all of us have been traumatized. So, baseline fact, by the time you're interacting with another adult, you've been traumatized, they've been traumatized, there's trauma in the mix. So, we're all walking around surrounded by this invisible minefield, and we carry our minefield with us. And the closer we get to people, the more and more time they spend traipsing around in our minefields, and the more and more time they spend traipsing around in our minefields. Well, you know what happens when you go traipsing around in a minefield? Sooner or later, you're going to step on a landmine and there's going to be an explosion. Our triggers are those landmines. So, if we know we're carrying our own minefield and our partner's carrying their minefields, first off, just knowing that, us being very, very aware, we have minefields, they have minefields, we can step on their mine at any point in time. So, it's important to go data mining. It's important to be in this relationship in a way that we are open to talking to our partner about our triggers. They are open to talking to us about them, but coming from a stance where we always take responsibility for our own triggers.
How do you create a safe enough environment where you can talk about triggers with your partner?
Good question. So, first off, you have to have a partner who is mature enough to be able to first admit, yeah, I've been traumatized. No, I'm not perfect. No, I don't always do it right. And yes, I'm going to make mistakes. Even better if you have a partner who's willing to ask forgiveness when they make mistakes. But that's a second level thing that can come later. Having a partner that realizes that they are human and make mistakes and are willing to give us grace in being human and make mistakes, that's a really good starting point. And it's worth talking about early on in a relationship about our humanness and about the human propensity to make mistakes, to say the wrong thing, to do the wrong thing, to make mistakes, but willingness to go back and apologize. So that's where it starts. Then open conversations about this idea that we've all been traumatized, and to talk about what some of our traumas are, some of our hurts have been, and to lovingly, openly hear their hurts and give honor to those hurts so that we know. For example, if you have somebody who you're in a relationship with somebody who they were cheated on in an early relationship, they're likely to be very, very sensitive to being cheated on. If you know that information, you can then have conversations with that person about what are the things that trigger you? What are the things that you see or hear that lead you to think you might be being cheated on, so that I can know to avoid those behaviors, so that I can talk openly about that experience with you, so I can be that, so I can be not that. I can be what I am, but not that. So finding out what that is for them.
So is it enough to hear and talk about the trauma and to honor it? Or do you have to go work on it with a counselor?
Depends on the trauma. Really depends on the trauma. There are some things that there are some partners that are going to come having done a lot of their work. So they're ready to be able to talk to others and own their own stuff. There are other people who have not. And I will tell you, I don't think any of us ever in life gets to the point where we've done all the work.
Right.
It's an ongoing thing. The work gets done over and over and over again. So every client that I know, and you've heard me say this to you, I highly recommend have a therapist or a relationship coach on speed dial. I have clients that I worked with 30 years ago that every few months or a year they'll call me and say, "Hey, I just need a tune up." Or, "Hey, we've got this thing going on. Can we have a couple of sessions?" Because relationships are too complex, too many
Yeah.
facets, too many moving parts for us to always do it on our own.
Yeah. Before I went to my very first Tony Robbins event, which was 2014, December, Date with Destiny. It's the one in the film that he did, I'm Not Your Guru. I never even heard of a coach. And, at the time I was working for Exxon. And, we had lots of couple friends. And I don't think anyone was going to any kind of coaching or therapy. It didn't used to be that way. And something shifted along the way, or at least maybe my circle of friends have shifted, and now a lot of people do. But still, a lot of people just don't. And as a guy, it was almost seen as weakness if you had to go there. I remember when my wife said, "We need to go to therapy," and I go, is there another choice? And she said, "You could go to the Hoffman process," and I picked go to the Hoffman process, and I did. So, what would you tell couples that have never done any kind of therapy, never done any kind of coaching, that it's a good idea?
Well, one of the things to ask is how they're doing. How's your relationship? Are you having fun? Is it satisfying? Is it enjoyable? Does it match up anywhere with that dream you had in your head of what your relationship was going to be? And if they're answering no to that, then to say, there are ways to make it better. And working with a coach or therapist doesn't have to be painful. It can be a lot of fun. I often have clients, especially early on, who will finish up a session and they'll say, "I never thought working on my marriage could be this much fun." But it really can be.
Well, I know I've had a lot of fun with you. We've laughed a lot about things, and it's just been such a great coach client relationship. You mentioned something in your questions was, is it meeting your expectations, your dreams, or your vision, or something like that? Do you think an intimate relationship can ever meet or match your dream or desire?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
How in the world could that be possible? Because I'm just saying we all, like I know, we want this perfect relationship, perfect partner. We want to be perfect. Everything needs to be about perfection. And at some point in our life, we figure out you can't get perfection, but then you could get kind of close. But is that settling, or is that good enough? Is that what your dream is, what your vision? Is that satisfying? What's that threshold? What do you tell someone as scattered as me?
Well, I tell people you can have the relationship of your dreams. You just have to be willing to put in the work on yourself and into that space in the middle between the two of you.
So, and what is that work? What does that look like?
Actually, it looks like a lot of things because it changes throughout life. The work that goes on early in a relationship changes later on in a relationship. And as the relationship itself grows and changes, the relationship, not just the two people, but the relationship itself needs different things. And so you start out in the really wonderful, lovely, yummy excitement phase of getting to know somebody, starting to like somebody, and over time falling in love. And I do stress over time falling in love. Because one of the things that often happens is that two people will meet each other and there's a click, there's a spark, there's excitement, and people often mistake that for love. And that is not love. Love takes time. Love doesn't happen immediately. I sincerely doubt that there is such a thing as love at first sight. There is lust at first sight, there's attraction at first sight, but love is deeper, and love is based on knowledge of one another, knowledge of ourselves, knowledge of human life, and that takes time.
So Hollywood movies, I just love Hollywood movies. And I think I've answered this before to people that I think I was in part raised on Hollywood movies. I love the Jimmy Stewart, Henry Fonda, fall in love immediately kind of good guy person. Not that I would ever do that, right? How do you deal with someone that was raised by Hollywood movies?
Well, it takes some deprogramming. It takes helping someone see that those Hollywood movies are not real life. Now, I think Hollywood movies are often based on snippets of real life, parts of real life, but real relationships, they take time. They grow up just like people do. You don't expect an infant to be able to do what a 5-year-old can do, and you don't expect a 5-year-old to be able to do what a 10-year-old can do. The same thing is true of relationships. An early relationship doesn't have the foundation to withstand the pressure of lifetime promises. You got to build a foundation first, and it's like building a house. You can't build a solid house if you don't have a solid foundation first. And that's the friendship piece, that's the getting to know each other piece. That's what you and I have talked about that I call the sorting process. And the sorting process is not sorting through other people and finding people and discarding them. It is sorting through yourself and sorting through the pieces of you so that you're figuring out what you need and what you want and what brings you joy and what doesn't. And we do that best in relationships. That sort of brings us back to where we started. And you asked what it is about intimate relationships, where Tony said you grow up in intimate relationships. It's that. It's that this process of intimate relationships where we come together with this person bringing our landmines and they bring their landmines, and we learn how to mesh it all together. And that's a time-consuming process.
Yeah. So I have several friends that are contemplating or actually giving up some really advanced careers to become relationship coaches. And what kind of advice would you give to someone that wants to make that kind of change in their life and lifestyle?
I would say, first off, give yourself some overlap time. Keep doing what you're doing and give yourself some time and experience in the saddle with being a relationship coach. I would also say get good, serious, hardcore training in relationships. It's a funny thing how I've been doing this for over 30 years. It's a funny thing how often I'll meet someone new and they say, "Oh, yeah, I could be a therapist. Oh, yeah, I could be a relationship coach," because we're all in relationships all the time. And so that often gives people the idea that, yes, I can do this. And many people can, but it's very complex work. It's work where you've got to be thinking on several levels all at the same time. And to get really good at it, like anything, it takes some real time in the saddle. It takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of paying attention, read everything you can read on relationships, take every class you can take on relationships, and work with people developing your own style.
Yeah. And are you still taking clients? Because I refer everyone that has a relationship issue when they come to me to Laurie Hubbs, the most incredible relationship coach ever created. But are you still taking clients?
I am, although I get lots of client requests, so I don't take every client. And no coach or therapist should be taking every client, because there are clients that come to me that what they're working on really isn't my strongest swim lane, and I only work in my strongest swim lane. And so those clients where it's not my swim lane, I refer them on to other people, and I have a really deep book of coaches that I refer to. And so I'm able to do that.
And what is your swim lane?
My swim lane is relationships, personal and professional.
What's coming up next for Laurie Hubbs? What's what kind of projects do you have? What do you want to accomplish? What are the next phase of your life? What do you want to do?
Well, one of the next things is in about 2 weeks, my husband Dean and I celebrate our 41st wedding anniversary.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you, which is pretty cool. We've got some travel planned for this year. And, I don't know about what's next. I do enough coaching to make me happy. I'll probably never fully retire from being a coach. We travel, we do lots of fun things, and just enjoying life. It's a nice stage of life to be in.
So if you had to give some advice to, say, a young couple, kind of newly married couple or newly together couple, and then one to maybe at the 7-year itch stage, and then someone to in the 30-year, kind of like retirement plus or minus stage, those 3 different cases, what advice would you give to each group of people like that?
To the new relationship, I would say make sure you're finding a relationship coach or a therapist you both click with so that from time to time you can go see them, and put a lot of effort into learning how relationships work. Go to seminars, go to conferences, get into coaching, put time and effort into your relationship. To that couple and the couple that's been married 7 years, I would say take on the million tiny moments belief system. And that is this, that when we think about marriages, when we think about long-term intimate relationships, we think about the big things, the kids, the careers, the houses, the trips. That's not what long-term intimate relationships are. Long-term intimate relationships are made up of a million tiny moments. And the more loving, fun, enjoyable tiny moments you have, the more enjoyable the relationship is going to be. The more tiny moments you have, the less enjoyable the relationship is going to be. And we as individuals, every moment of every day, have a choice about how we make that tiny moment with our partner. That little thing, keeping in mind the proportion of those, is going to dictate the quality of the relationship. And then for the couple that's been together 30 years, if they're doing it successfully and they're happy, I say rock on. Keep doing what you've been doing. If you're not happy, then find somebody who can help you change some of those thinking and behavior patterns so you can build the kind of relationship that you've always wanted.
Laurie, you are amazing. I love the way that you could just field any question that just pops into my head. And it's always been that way with you. I come up with some crazy things and you always know. Sometimes you might say, let me think on that for a second. And like seconds later, you come up with a brilliant answer and coaching advice for me. And I so appreciate you. I appreciate you coming on our podcast. I know that our audience here will reap some great rewards if they just listen to this. And if they choose to work with you, that's even better. We'll have your contact information in our post. It'll be happening in about 4 weeks. And thank you very much. Any final words from Laurie Hubbs?
Oh, I thoroughly enjoy working with you too, Robert. This is great. Thank you so much. It's been a joy being here.